Earth is our home, this incredible dynamic place, and we, humans, we're constantly tangled up with it, shaping it, and, being shaped by it too. But how do you even begin to study that messy, intricate relationship?
That's really the core question, isn't it? And it pulls us right into this deep dive. We're exploring the field that tries to do just that, human geography.
Right.
Our sources, they lay out what this is all about, helping us see the Earth not just as, a rock floating in space, but as the home we share and interact with constantly.
Okay, so let's dig into these sources then. They show us how geographers have, wrestled with the best way to study this relationship over the years.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look at that back and forth and then really trace how humans have interacted with nature, starting from a place where nature seemed, completely in charge.
Yeah, dictating terms almost.
Exactly. All the way to where we are now, actively remaking the landscape.
Precisely. And the sources bring it back to us, the people. Where do the billions of us actually live on this planet? Why do we cluster in some spots and seem to avoid others? And how are our populations changing that whole picture?
And finally, we'll look at some of the most fundamental ways we use the Earth's resources. Our sources call them primary activities.
That's right.
Think farming, herding, pulling minerals out of the ground. It's a journey through the surprisingly complex ways we make our living from the planet.
And at its heart, human geography is about understanding the Earth as the home of human beings and, everything that sustains them. It's fundamentally the story of nature and human beings woven together.
And it turns out, figuring out how to study that weaving, that's led to some pretty classic arguments in the field over the years, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Geographers have debated back and forth. Should we be trying to find, universal laws about human spatial behavior? That's the nomothetic approach.
Yeah.
Or should we focus on describe the unique characteristics of particular places? That's idiographic.
Right. Descriptive versus lawmaking.
Exactly. And then, do we study the world by looking at specific regions in detail? Or do we examine particular phenomena like, say, migration or farming systematically across the globe?
Or even, should we try to build big theories or look really closely at specific historical contexts, institutional setups to understand why things are the way they are? These debates, they really shaped the field for a long time.
But a really key insight, I think, from the sources is that the rigid separation we sometimes imagine between physical geography and human geography, it's kind of a false one. They argue pretty forcefully that nature and humans are inseparable. You can't truly understand one without the other. You really have to see them holistically.
What's fascinating is how deep that connection runs. Even in just the way we talk about the Earth, you see it everywhere, the language geographers use.
It's so true. Think about it. We use terms like the face of the Earth.
Yeah.
The mouth of a river, the snout of a glacier. We describe human creations, like transport networks, as arteries of circulation.
And it goes further. Regions, villages, even whole countries have been described as organisms. I think the sources mentioned German geographers famously saw the state as a living organism.
That's right. It just shows how ingrained that connection is in our language and our thinking, almost unconsciously,
Yeah.
You really can't easily separate nature and human when they're described using the same kind of metaphors.
That linguistic connection actually, it mirrors the evolving dynamic relationship we have with the environment itself. Let's maybe trace that story a bit.
Good idea. Where do we start?
Well, in the very early stages of human development, the relationship was pretty one-sided, right?
Mm-hmm.
Humans were massively influenced, almost dictated to, by nature. This idea is known as environmental determinism.
Right. When technology was really basic and social development was, primitive, people had to adapt much more completely to nature's conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Our sources describe this as a naturalized human, someone deeply attuned to nature, sometimes fearing it, sometimes worshiping it.
And there's a really powerful story from the sources that captures this perfectly. The account of Benda in the Abu Jamad area of central India. He lives in this tiny village deep in the forest.
Yeah, I remember that one. His entire existence is just built around the forest.
Completely. He practices shifting cultivation, burning small plots to clear land, enrich the soil with ash. His food, his livelihood, it comes directly from the forest leaves, roots, herbs he gathers to trade.
And it mentions before taking water from a stream, he seeks permission from the forest spirits. That level of connection.
Exactly. And when outsiders appear, Benda and his community, they don't confront them, they just disappear into the dense canopy. The source says, becoming one with the spirit of the forest.
Wow.
For societies like this, nature isn't just a resource. It truly is Mother Nature, the provider and controller of life.
But then something fundamentally shifted, didn't it? As humans developed more complex social structures, deeper cultural understanding, they also created better technology.
And technology seems to be the real game changer here. The sources really highlight it as a key indicator of cultural development, the thing that starts to loosen what they call the shackles of environment.
Precisely. Our growing understanding of natural laws allowed us to manipulate them, to work with them. Understanding friction and heat led to fire.
Right.
Understanding genetics helps us tackle diseases. Understanding aerodynamics lets us build planes that, defy gravity. This knowledge, turned into technology, gives us more options, more freedom.
And that leads us to the next big idea. Possibilism. Nature isn't a dictator anymore. It's more like a provider of ingredients, offering opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Humans then choose from those opportunities and use technology and culture to create possibilities that just weren't there naturally.
And the result is what geographers call the cultural landscape.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, you see the mark of human activity on the natural world.
Oh, absolutely. Health resorts built high in the mountains, sprawling cities, vast fields of crops, harbors carved into coastlines.
Even satellites orbiting the planet.
Exactly. Nature itself gets humanized, bearing our imprints everywhere.
There's another story in the sources, a wonderful contrast to Benda, about Kari in Trondheim. That's a town in Norway where winters are, long, dark, and harsh.
Right. And Kari's life is just a testament to possibilism, isn't it? She navigates this intense winter using technology, special tires on her car, headlights always on.
Working in an office that's artificially heated. Her university campus is covered by this huge glass dome, controlling the temperature and light, keeping the snow out. It's amazing.
And she eats tropical fruits like bananas and kiwis flown in from thousands of miles away.
Yeah. Keeps an orchid on her desk, a plant that couldn't possibly survive there naturally, and she can hop on a morning flight to London for a meeting and be back home by evening.
That story just vividly shows how technology and human choices create a life despite the environmental conditions, really adapting it.
So, the study of this dynamic human-environment interaction, it's also changed over time, leading to different perspectives, different approaches within human geography.
And it's inherently interdisciplinary, isn't it? Drawing on insights from all over the place.
Totally. If we look at the history laid out in the sources early on, during the colonial era, it was largely about exploration and description.
Yeah, mapping and understanding the world, often driven by imperial ambitions or trade interests.
That evolved into regional analysis in the later colonial period, trying to understand the whole Earth by meticulously studying specific areas, describing every aspect of a place.
Then came the focus on areal differentiation in the 1930s, sort of trying to pinpoint what made each region unique and distinct from others.
The late 1950s and 60s saw a big shift with the spatial organization approach, often called the quantitative revolution.
Right. With new tools like computers becoming available, geographers started using statistics and mathematical models, even drawing inspiration from physics, to look for patterns and structures in human activity across space. Kind of searching for those laws.
But that highly quantitative, sometimes maybe impersonal approach, it led to a reaction.
It did. In the 1970s, new schools of thought emerged, pushing human geography to be more relevant to real-world social and political issues, things people were actually experiencing.
You saw the rise of the welfare or humanistic school, which shifted focus to people's well-being, looking at issues like access to housing, healthcare, education.
Then there was the radical school, using critical theories, including Marxian ideas, to analyze things like poverty, inequality, deprivation, often linking them directly to economic systems like capitalism.
And the behavioral school emphasized subjective experience, how people perceive and interact with space based on who they are, their ethnicity, religion, gender, social class, and so on.
And by the 1990s, postmodern thinking entered the field too, questioning the whole idea of grand universal theories and really emphasizing the importance of understanding local contexts in all their complexity. This continuous evolution just shows a field constantly grappling with how best to understand the human experience on Earth.
And it's exactly why human geography has so many connections to other fields. It's inherently interdisciplinary, like you said.
Absolutely. You see it linking up with sociology and social geography, economics and economic geography, urban studies and urban geography, demography and population geography, history and historical geography.
It needs insights from everywhere.
It really does, to get the full picture.
Okay, so we look at the field itself, the relationship between humans and the environment. Now let's zoom in on the human element. where do people actually live and why?
Well, the sources make a really fundamental point first. The people of a country are its true wealth. They're the most important resource.
Right.
But where they are located is incredibly uneven across the planet, just wildly uneven.
There's that quote from George B. Cressy that sums it up beautifully. Asia has many places where people are few, and few places where people are very many. And that applies globally too, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Think about the statistic. Roughly 90% of the world's population is squeezed into only about 10% of the Earth's land area.
Wow. 90% and 10% of the land. That statistic alone tells you how concentrated we are.
It's huge. And even more strikingly, 60% of the global population lives in just the 10 most populous countries. And 6 of those 10 are in Asia.
That concentration is just immense.
It really is.
So to get a handle on that concentration, we use this measure, population density?
Exactly. Population density is simply the number of people per unit of land area. Usually we measure it in persons per square kilometer. You just divide the total population by the total area. It's a basic ratio.
So the example from the source, if you had an area of 100 square kilometers with 150,000 people living there.
Yeah.
The density would be 150,000 divided by 100, which is 1,500 persons per square kilometer.
Right. And globally, as you might guess from those earlier stats, Asia has the highest average population density.
Which brings us to the big question. Why? Why is it so uneven? What makes people flock to some areas and, well, avoid others?
It's a mix of different things, really. Geographical features play a big part, economic opportunities are crucial, and even social or cultural factors come into it.
Okay, let's break that down. Geographical factors.
Well, access to water is absolutely fundamental. Always has been. River valleys, for example, have historically been cradles of civilization, and they remain densely populated because water is essential for survival, farming, industry, pretty much everything.
Landforms are key too, I imagine.
Definitely. Flat plains and gentle slopes are much easier for farming, building cities, roads, you name it, compared to rugged mountains or steep hills.
That makes sense.
Climate plays a huge role. People generally prefer moderate climates. These extremely hot or cold places, like deserts or polar regions, are very sparsely populated. Technology helps us cope, sure, but it hasn't eliminated climate's influence entirely.
And soils.
Fertile soils are crucial for agriculture, naturally supporting higher population densities where you can grow food easily.
Okay, so those are the geographical poles. What about economic factors? They must be huge drivers today.
Oh, massive. Areas rich in mineral deposits often attract large populations because they create jobs, not just in mining, but in related industries too.
And urbanization. That seems like a major one.
It's a huge magnet. Cities offer a wider range of job opportunities, generally better schools and healthcare, and just the general buzz and facilities of city life. This powerful pull draws millions from rural areas every year, causing cities, especially megacities, to swell incredibly rapidly.
Though, as the sources kind of hint, all that density and opportunity in cities, it certainly comes with its own set of challenges and less pleasant aspects too.
For sure. Industrialization is another major economic factor. Industrial belts create this ripple effect of jobs, attracting not just factory workers, but also people needed for transport, services, admin support. The Kobe Osaka industrial region in Japan is mentioned as a classic example.
Then you have social and cultural reasons. Places can be magnets just because they hold religious or cultural significance for certain groups, drawing people in.
And on the flip side, you have factors that push people away. Negative things like social or political unrest, war, conflict, or even things like epidemics, severe water shortages, or just a complete lack of economic opportunity can force people to leave a place. These are the push factors.
And what draws them in, those are the pull factors, right?
Exactly. Pull factors are things like better job prospects, higher wages, improved living conditions, peace, stability, safety, access to good education and healthcare, or even just a more pleasant climate sometimes.
So it's this constant interplay between the pushes and pulls, combined with the underlying geographical conditions, that really shapes the global map of where people live.
That's a good summary.
Okay? And with all these people living on Earth, how do we actually, make a living from it? The sources categorize these fundamental activities that directly use natural resources as primary activities.
Yeah, and the people doing these jobs are sometimes called red-collar workers. It's an interesting term, reflecting that the work is often outdoors and physically demanding.
Right, and the type of primary activity you see in a region is heavily influenced by both the physical environment and the social development of the people there.
Makes sense. The environment offers possibilities, and the culture and tech determine how they're used.
So the very oldest way humans made a living was hunting and gathering. Just basic survival. Right?
Absolutely. Surviving directly off the wild plants and animals in their immediate surroundings. This was often practiced in some of the harshest environments and very cold places in the far north or dense, hot rainforests near the equator.
And the characteristics.
While technology was minimal, capital investment was basically zero, and they only produced enough to survive day to day with very little surplus. Low yield per person.
Interestingly, the sources note that some modern gathering still exists and can even be market-oriented, collecting valuable things like bark, nuts, or tree sap.
Yeah, there's that fun detail about how chicle from the zapota tree was the original base for chewing gum.
Huh?
But broadly, traditional gathering is declining globally. It's often replaced by more efficient farming or synthetic alternatives.
Okay, so from hunting, humans eventually developed pastoralism, or animal rearing, that came from realizing they could domesticate animals instead of just chasing them. Right?
Exactly. A bit more control, a bit more stability. And this falls into two main types. First is nomadic herding.
Why?
This is a primitive subsistence activity where herders constantly move with their animals, their livestock, searching for pasture and water. The type of animal really varies by region. Cattle in parts of Africa, sheep, goats, camels in deserts, yaks and llamas in high mountains, reindeer up in the Arctic.
And within that nomadic herding, there's transhumance, the seasonal movement, isn't it?
Yes, like those herders in the Himalayas, the sources mention Gujars, Bakarwals, Gadis, Bhutias who move their flocks between the plains in winter and high mountain pastures in summer, following the seasons.
But the sources point out that nomadic herding is generally under pressure now.
Yeah, it's declining, mainly due to national borders restricting movement and land being taken over for settlements or other uses. Their traditional routes are being cut off.
So the other type of pastoralism is commercial livestock rearing. How does that differ?
It's much more organized and capital intensive. Animals are raised on large, permanent, fenced ranches with controlled grazing. It's often specialized, focusing on one type of animal bred specifically for meat, wool, or hides that are sold on the market. Think big ranches in Australia or the Americas.
Right. Okay, so hunting, gathering, herding. Then, of course, there's agriculture, farming. And the sources say this takes countless forms depending on local conditions.
Absolutely. Let's start with subsistence agriculture. The name says it all, really.
Growing food primarily to feed your own family.
Exactly. And a key type of that is intensive subsistence agriculture, which is really common in densely populated parts of Asia, especially monsoon Asia.
What defines that?
Farms are typically very small, often inherited and subdivided over generations. It's worked mainly by hand, using lots of family labor. Because it's so intensive, the yield per acre, per unit of land is high. But the yield per person is often low because so much human effort goes into it.
And wet paddy or rice cultivation is a classic example of this, right?
Very characteristic. Needs a lot of water, a lot of labor.
Then there's plantation agriculture. That sounds quite different.
It is. It's large-scale, commercially focused farming, typically found in tropical areas, and often originally introduced by European colonists.
So we're talking about huge farms growing single cash crops.
Right. Things like tea, coffee, rubber, sugarcane, bananas, pineapples, mostly for export. They require significant investment capital, management expertise, and usually a large hired labor force.
And the sources mention historical examples.
Yeah, like the British establishing tea gardens in India and Sri Lanka, or the Dutch with sugarcane in Indonesia. Though they also note that today, ownership has often shifted to local governments or nationals.
Okay, moving to different climates. Extensive commercial grain cultivation. Where do we find that?
This is typical of the vast, semi-arid grasslands in the mid-latitudes. Think the prairies of North America, the steppes of Eurasia, the pampas in South America.
And what's it like?
The farms are massive, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of acres, and it's highly mechanized. They use machinery like tractors, seed drills, and combine harvesters extensively.
So lots of machines, fewer people.
Exactly. The yield per acre might actually be lower than intensive farming, but the yield per person is very high because one farmer or a small team can manage huge areas with all that equipment. Wheat is the principal crop, usually.
Got it. Then there's mixed farming. What's involved there?
This is common in developed regions like much of Europe and parts of North America. It combines growing crops with raising livestock on the same farm.
So a bit of both.
Yeah, and both parts contribute significantly to the farm's income. Crops grown often include wheat, barley, oats, maize, but also fodder crops specifically to feed the animals. The animals might be cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry.
And is it intensive?
It's usually quite capital intensive, yes. Requires investment in machinery, farm buildings, fertilizers, and high quality livestock breeds.
Okay. How about dairy farming? That sounds pretty specialized.
It is highly specialized, focusing solely on raising cattle for milk and dairy products like butter, cheese, yogurt. It's very advanced and capital intensive.
What does that involve?
A lot of attention to breeding for high milk yields, animal health, veterinary care, storage, and processing of milk. It needs significant investment in facilities. Major areas include northwestern Europe, Canada, and parts of Australia and New Zealand, often near urban centers.
Right, near the markets.
Yeah.
Then there's Mediterranean agriculture. That sounds specific to a climate zone.
It is. Found in regions with that classic Mediterranean climate, warm, dry summers, mild, wet winters. It's a highly specialized form of commercial farming.
What are they known for growing?
Famous for citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, grapefruits, also olives and figs, and especially viticulture growing grapes. Yes, a lot of it goes into high-quality wine production, but also for table grapes, raisins, and currants. A unique aspect is that they can often grow valuable fruits and vegetables during their mild winter when demand is high in colder regions, so they export a lot.
Interesting advantage. And finally, market gardening and horticulture.
This is all about growing high-value crops, vegetables, fruits, and flowers, specifically for nearby urban markets. Farms are usually small but very intensive, maximizing output from a small area.
Location must be key.
Absolutely. They need to be close to cities with good transportation links so the produce can get to market quickly and fresh. The sources mention truck farming, where farms specialize in vegetables that can be transported overnight to distant markets.
And the Netherlands example.
Yeah, the Netherlands specializing in growing and exporting flowers, especially tulips, globally. That's a classic example of this kind of intensive market-focused horticulture.
So besides the types of farming, the sources also look at how farms are actually owned and operated.
Right. Two main models are mentioned besides individual private ownership. One is cooperative farming.
How does that work?
Farmers voluntarily pool their resources, maybe buying machinery together, processing crops collectively, marketing together to achieve efficiencies and better bargaining power. But crucially, they still own their individual farms.
So cooperation for mutual benefit, but still private land.
Exactly. The sources say it's been particularly successful in some Western European countries, like Denmark.
And the other model, collective farming.
This is based on social ownership of the means of production, including land and collective labor. Land and resources are pooled, and everyone works together, sharing the output.
Like the kolkhoz system in the former Soviet Union.
Yes, that's the classic example mentioned. Sometimes, small private plots were allowed for families to grow things for themselves, but the main farming was done collectively.
Okay, one last primary activity the sources cover is mining, extracting minerals from the earth.
Yeah, humans have been doing this for millennia. Think of the Copper Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. But its importance just exploded with the Industrial Revolution and our demand for fuel and metals.
What makes a mining operation viable?
Well, it depends on both physical factors, the size of the mineral deposit, its grade or quality, how deep it is, and economic factors.
Right.
Like how much demand there is for the mineral, the technology available to extract and process it, the capital needed for investment, and crucially, the cost of labor and transport. All these have to line up for it to be profitable.
And how do they actually get the minerals out? What methods?
Two main ways. First is surface mining, also called open cast or strip mining. This is used for deposits that are close to the surface.
Advantages.
It's generally easier, cheaper, and less risky than going deep underground. You can remove large amounts of overburden, the overlying rock and soil, and extract the ore relatively efficiently. Output can be large.
And the other method?
Underground mining, sometimes called the shaft method. This is used for ores that lie deep below the surface.
That sounds more complex.
It is. It requires digging vertical shafts down to the ore body, then horizontal tunnels or galleries to access it. You need complex systems for ventilation, transport, and pumping out water. It's also significantly riskier for the workers due to potential gas leaks, fires, floods, and collapses.
And the sources note an interesting recent shift in where mining happens.
Yeah, there's a trend where developed economies are often retreating from mining and heavy processing, partly due to high labor costs and stricter environmental regulations.
So who's picking it up?
Developing countries with large workforces and often rich mineral resources are becoming more important players. Some countries in Africa, South America, and Asia rely heavily on earnings from mineral exports.
Right. Okay, so all these primary activities, farming, herding, mining, they support a global human population that has grown at just an astonishing rate.
It's truly mind-boggling when you look at the numbers. The human population has increased more than tenfold in just the last 500 years.
Wow.
And it quadrupled just during the 20th century alone. The curve just went almost vertical.
So to understand this rapid growth and how populations change over time, geographers use the demographic transition theory.
Yes, it's a really useful model. It basically describes how population patterns typically shift as a society develops, moving from being primarily rural and agrarian towards being more urban, industrial, and literate. It usually happens in distinct stages.
Okay, what's stage one?
In stage one, both birth rates and death rates are very high. Because death rates are high due to disease, poor sanitation, famine risk, birth rates also need to be high just to maintain the population, maybe grow very slowly.
And societies are like?
Low tech, mostly agrarian. Life expectancy is short. 200 years ago, pretty much every country on Earth was in this stage.
Then stage two is where things really take off.
Exactly. Stage two is characterized by death rates starting to fall sharply. Why? Because of improvements in public health, sanitation, food supply, maybe basic medicine.
But birth rates?
Birth rates tend to stay high, at least initially. People's attitudes about family size take longer to change, so you get this big gap opening up between high births and falling deaths.
Which means massive population growth.
Right.
A population explosion.
Precisely. That's the period of most rapid population increase many developing countries went through or are still in this stage.
Then eventually comes stage three. What happens then?
In stage three, birth rates also start to decline significantly. As societies become more urbanized, education levels rise, especially for women, access to contraception improves, and people see that more children are surviving, they tend to choose to have fewer children. Family size becomes more of a conscious decision.
So both birth and death rates are low.
Right. They both fall to low levels, leading to population growth slowing down considerably, maybe stabilizing, or even starting to decline in some cases, which some call stage 4 or 5. The society is typically urbanized, literate, high-tech.
It's a powerful model because, as the sources say, you can look at different countries today and see them in different stages of this transition. Helps explain their current growth rates.
Absolutely. It provides a framework for understanding those diverse demographic situations around the world.
And of course, societies also use various measures to try and influence population change, don't they?
Yes, population policies are common. Things ranging from promoting family planning and access to contraceptives to sometimes using tax incentives or disincentives related to family size, or even just government propaganda campaigns.
And this all links back to some long-standing concerns, like those raised by Thomas Malthus way back in the late 1700s.
Right. Malthus famously theorized that population tends to grow geometrically, like 2, 4, 8, 16, while our ability to produce food only grows arithmetically, like 2, 3, 4, 5.
Leading to potential crises, famine, disease, war that would act as checks on population.
Exactly. While his predictions haven't unfolded exactly as he thought, partly due to technological advances in agriculture, the underlying concern about balancing population with resources remains relevant. The sources implicitly suggest that managing rapid population growth is pretty crucial for the sustainable use of our planet's resources.
So wow, we've covered a lot of ground. We started with what human geography even is, how it tries to study this incredibly complex relationship between us humans and the Earth.
Yeah, looking at those historical debates and the evolving understanding of the human-environment link.
Then we traced how that interaction itself has evolved from environmental determinism to possibilism, driven by technology and culture.
We looked at where people cluster on the planet and why the geographical, economic, social push and pull factors
explored population density and how that distribution is so uneven.
And then dug into some of the fundamental ways we use the Earth's bounty through primary activities, hunting, gathering, herding, all the different types of farming, mining.
All against the backdrop of a constantly changing global population, explained through the demographic transition model.
It really underscores just how dynamic this whole relationship is, doesn't it? It's constantly being shaped by our technology, our culture, our economies, and simply the sheer numbers of us on the planet now.
It really does. And thinking about how technology just keeps advancing, how populations continue to shift and grow, but differently in different parts of the world, it leaves you wondering, doesn't it?
Wondering what?
Well, how will our primary activities and just our very presence on the Earth continue to literally reshape its surface in the coming decades? And what entirely new challenges or maybe, surprising possibilities might emerge from this ongoing restless interaction between us and our home planet?
That's a big question to ponder. The story is definitely far from over.